NHS bosses across much of the country, including the whole of Kent, are limiting fertility treatment to just 2 cycles when they should be offering 3. 1 in 7 couples in the UK have difficulty conceiving, and a cycle of IVF treatment costs the NHS just under £3,500. Well, on the line now is Professor Robert Winston, a world expert in fertility, who also pioneered new treatments to improve the treatment itself. Robert Winston, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Tell me first of all, from the early days when you were involved in this pioneering work, how have things changed? Have we moved IVF on now, and is it much more successful than it was in the early days?
Not enough, and basically the basic problem is still that a huge number of human embryos do not implant for reasons which are not very clear, and unfortunately there is not enough research going on to try and understand that mechanism. I think that's a key issue. In my view, it would be possible to deliver IVF much more cheaply if we understood the background behind embryo failure. But I have to say just one other thing, if I may, very briefly.
Yeah.
IVF is not the only treatment for infertility. In my view, it's used far too often, and that is also adding to the costs of infertility treatment.
What other treatments are there?
A whole range of them. I mean, it depends on the cause of the infertility. What is happening now, of course, is that patients go straight to IVF clinics without actually having their infertility properly investigated. There should be much better treatments for male infertility than there are. There are numerous examples where there is surgical correction of damage in the pelvis, which can be dealt with very, very successfully, which is actually more successful than IVF. And a huge number of people have hormonal disorders, which can be treated with tablets or injections. Okay,
so if we did that, it would mean, would it not, that we'd have more money to spend on those who actually needed IVF? That was the only way they could conceive.
Absolutely right. That's a really important issue. And the other issue is this, that the NHS is basing its charges to a large extent on what the private sector charges, and that is iniquitous. Unfortunately, it is very, very unfortunate that there is the private provision has been burgeoning because as the NHS gives up treatments, of course, the private clinics rattle the box and say, isn't this terrible for women with IVF? But of course, they actually profit from this because more patients go to the private sector.
Although I thought £3,500, in real terms, I don't suppose that's much more than it was costing when you started.
Yes, it is quite a lot
more.
When we started, we were doing IVF for around £800 a cycle at Hammersmith Hospital.
How many years ago was that?
Well, it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But let me say that we were still offering IVF much more recently at around £2,000 per cycle. And one of the problems partly is if you have a small unit with a rather low throughput, it will cost much more. And one of the ways of getting around this is to concentrate IVF much more into larger units where, of course, you can streamline the procedure and make it much cheaper. And, of course, IVF patients being relatively fit can usually travel to a larger unit, and that would be one sensible solution. But, £3,500, it may be in Kent, but there are many NHS authorities where they're paying up to £6,000.
Wow. Okay.
And so, one of the issues is this, that the NHS is not actually doesn't have a harmonious system of billing. They don't actually know how much the treatment costs, so often they're using IVF to support other services.
Okay,
making a profit.
Obviously, we know that you are passionate about this, and you do believe that couples who are facing fertility problems deserve to be treated on the NHS. Can you make a case for that?
Yes, I think I can. I think that, if we believe that infertility is caused by a disease, and infertility is merely a symptom, but it's a symptom which is extremely distressing, causes as much pain, for example, as osteoarthritis, which is treatable on the NHS, that in itself is, I think, a real issue. And secondly, for most of us, the most life-changing experience we have, in fact, is nurturing the next generation. And unfortunately, in our society, we don't always do a great job with our children. We could do a lot better. And if you talk to people who've had children as a result of in vitro fertilization or any treatment, they invariably say how much their life has changed and how much better and more healthy they are in consequence.
Yeah. So Lord Robert, a Nigel there. Lord Robert Winston, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Fascinating talking to you. Let's talk now to Anthony McCarthy, who is from the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. Anthony McCarthy, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you've just heard Lord Robert Winston there talking very passionately about IVF and how it can, really solve people's hurt, if you like, and he's seen it firsthand. What would you say to that?
Well, firstly, I'd say I agree with much of what he said at the beginning, that there are many types of treatments that do not involve some of the ethical problems of IVF, which are not tried. And I think it's very important that people with infertility are exposed to them and that more money is invested in them. So that's very important. I think what wasn't really mentioned is the ethical problems surrounding IVF.
What are the ethical problems?
Well, IVF does, as its practice, involve the creation and ultimately destruction of embryos, so-called spare embryos. And what we say is that the embryo is what we were, the developing human being at its earliest stage, and IVF produces these outside of the womb, and then some are frozen or some are given over for destructive experimentation, and this does involve the creation and ultimately destruction of new human life, and that this is a serious problem. If you start
Although, we've had lots of people look at this, and the law came down on the side that was allowable, that we could produce embryos and use the ones we needed.
Well, sure. I mean, there are all sorts of laws. Some of us will disagree with them, and some of us won't. But I think the moral argument has never been correctly made. If you start talking about early human beings as spare, if you subject them to quality control,
Well, they're not human beings, are they?
Well, no, they are. If you look at any human embryology text, you will be told that a new member of the human species, a human being, begins from the moment of conception. That's how we all began. We didn't change. We didn't become another being. You were you then, and I was I then. It's not an animal. It's not something else. We're not spirits. So even according to the most basic science, we're talking about an early human being that is continuing to develop.
Okay.
It's left.
I understand that. That's how you see it. I get that. So, but
that is how it is, I'm afraid.
Well, it is in your mind, and it's not everybody believes that. But anyway, the point is, can you not put that to one side? I know that's important to you, and see the joy that this procedure can bring to a couple who are struggling to have children.
Well, of course, the creation of any new human being is a joy. But the central question is, are we justified in bringing about children in this way and destroying some very young children in this way? And I think the answer to that must be no. The end does not justify the means. So, of course, anybody will celebrate a new human life and a baby. What we're saying is, why not celebrate all human life and not reduce people to products subject to quality control?
Okay, Anthony McCarthy, we'll leave it there. The signal on your Skype wasn't great. He's from the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Children. I'd love to know what you make of what you've heard. You've heard Lord Robert Winston very passionately talking about